Well, I saw a news story the other day out of London, Ontario. It was about a group called PEGIDA. PEGIDA is not well known in North America. It's a European organization founded in Germany, which roughly translates into Patriots Against the Islamification of Europe. It's not quite a humanist group, not quite an atheist group. It's more against Islamification. And you can take it or leave it. You can agree or disagree. They're a completely peaceful group. They just have protests and marches. And their Canadian branch, which is quite small, wanted to do that in the city of London, Ontario. And they wanted to do so in a public facility. Well, London's City Hall got wind of this, and they were adamant that they would restrict or ban PEGIDA and similar groups from having rallies or even peaceful and quiet meetings in public facilities, that they would apply a political test. And in this age of Islamophobia mania, PEGIDA obviously fails. Is this legal? It's one thing for a private company to ban a meeting from a hotel room or a convention center, but can we literally ban political views from public facilities? Joining us now via Skype from Calgary is our friend John Carpay, the Executive Director of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. John, great to see you again.
Good to see you, Ezra.
John, I sent you the story from London, Ontario. No one has to agree with PEGIDA. I don't know them well. I know that in Europe they have a reputation for being very peaceful, and in Canada the same. This is clearly a political litmus test. Is it legal under Canadian law for a city council to ban people from using city facilities because of their political views?
No, it's completely illegal. The government at all levels, so that would be the federal, provincial, municipal, they have a legal duty under Canada's Constitution to be neutral. So government has no business banning a rally or a parade or anything else based on the content of the opinion. The only time where government can step in and ban a rally or a march is if there is going to be, if the group is committing violence or is advocating violence.
Well,
Now,
obviously PEGIDA has not done that.
If PEGIDA was a violent group or if it was advocating violence, one of those two things, it would be entirely legitimate for City Hall to say, no, you can't use city facilities. But unless the group is violent or advocating for violence, the government has to be neutral in terms of the viewpoint.
Now, what is the source of this law? Is this the freedom of speech provisions in Section 2 of the Charter? Is this the due process provisions that people may not be, that people have the right to certain process from the government? What part of the Charter of Rights or the Constitution are you relying on for your view?
Charter Section 2B, freedom of expression. And the government has to uphold freedom of expression and freedom of religion, freedom of association. And in upholding those fundamental freedoms in the public square, the government cannot discriminate based on viewpoints.
And it's been a while since I've brushed up on my charter politics, but in Section 7, it basically says you cannot be disabused of these rights except in a process, what's the exact phrasing there? That basically you have to have a proper process under law. So not only do you have certain rights, but you cannot have these rights taken away from you in an arbitrary or a disproportionate manner. Am I roughly getting that correct?
Yes, under Section 1 of the Charter, the government can only violate fundamental freedoms like expression, religion, association, peaceful assembly. These freedoms can only be violated by government if government has a pressing and substantial objective, and if government is impairing the rights as little as possible.
Yeah.
And the onus is on the government to justify the infringement.
Yeah. We briefly showed a headline from London, I think it was from Global News, where this was an emergency motion. So basically virtue signaling by politicians who want to make sure they're on the right side of the issue. But that's, I mean, you and I have talked about this before. I remember it was about 3 years ago now, maybe even more. In the city of Nanaimo, there was a similar situation. There it wasn't against PEGIDA, which is an anti-Islamic group. Then it was a Christian group. It was LeaderCast, if I recall, which is a very gentle Christian leadership conference that's beamed by satellite, sort of like a pay-per-view. Some people watch pay-per-view boxing matches, other people watch pay-per-view Christian leadership conferences. And in Nanaimo, they had rented the Nanaimo Conference Center, which, by the way, is a huge money-losing white elephant in that town. So you'd think the city would want all the customers they could get. They signed the contract, they sold tickets, they were going to meet in the Nanaimo Conference Center and watch this satellite broadcast. And then in a similar showboating motion, Nanaimo City Council ripped up the contract with this Christian group and denounced them. It sure feels like that again. You helped us in that case. Do you think this showboating city council in London, Ontario, has any clue that they're violating the civil rights of their own citizens?
I think the politicians are clueless about the charter. I think they're caught up in this mentality that we see so often these days, which is free speech for me, but not for thee. Because the same people that are shutting down free speech, if they themselves were being silenced, they would be outraged and they would cry bloody murder and talk about their right to speak. So, you know, the important thing that a lot of people forget is that the very purpose of having a free expression guarantee in the Constitution is for unpopular speech, the speech that we hate, the speech that we find abhorrent. I'm not even saying whether the PEGIDA speech is particularly bad or not, but let's say for argument's sake that it's just horrific anti-Muslim speech, not violent, but very anti-Muslim. Even if that's the case, the very purpose of freedom of expression is to protect the expression of all views, including those that are very unpopular. And politicians are not getting it.
Yeah, I mean, it's so easy for us to do a thought exercise, swap out Islam in the case of PEGIDA for, let's say, an anti-Christian group, of which there have been anti-Christian lobbies in this country for decades, if not centuries. I think of Henry Morgentaler, who wasn't just, of course, an abortionist, but his primary title in his later years was the head of the Secular Humanist Association, which was a specifically anti-Christian group. And the kind of anti-Christian demonizations of that lobby group, frankly, of any mainstream media. I mean, how many shows on the CBC were explicitly anti-Christian in their purpose? If someone were to dare say, we will ban anti-Christian activists from renting public space in our public facility, the liberal media and the mainstream politicians would immediately get it, that keep your rosaries off my ovaries, or separation of church and state. They would get that in a second, but everyone is walking on eggshells about certain protected issues, and I think Islam is one of them. I don't know PEGIDA Canada well enough to answer the question you put, but as you point out, it's irrelevant. Listen, John, we don't have a client here. I remember in Nanaimo, we actually went to bat for the group that was roughhoused there. I want to look at this some more, but if there is actually a group that was banned from renting space at a London public facility because of politics, I'm going to give you a call and we'll see if we can get you to help, because we cannot let this precedent be set. That could be taken as the expression of M103, the anti-Islamophobia motion. Imagine if suddenly all around the country, if you couldn't get a space at a public library or a public convention center because politicians said you had the wrong view. That would be terrifying. Last word to you, John. Do you think we're losing free speech in this country? Do you think the trend is getting worse?
I hate to say it, but I think things are going to get worse before they get better. I see the next 1, 2, 3, 4 years, we're likely to see a further decline, but that's why we have to fight back all the harder. And, at some point, people are going to have to realize that if they want to preserve their own free speech rights, they have to defend the free speech rights of people that they disagree with. And unless people are operating on that level, you're going to see the space of acceptable speech just get smaller and smaller. So there's always hope for the long run, but short run, in the short-term future, we've got some rough years ahead of us.
Hey, if you like that, sign up for my show every day. Click on the screen to subscribe.